The talk that I want to give today is called Climate Change Winners and Losers. And I'm really kind of threading a needle here because I am a dyed-in-the-wool optimist about human ingenuity and about making solutions to problems as they come up, as we always have throughout history. So I wanted to sort of challenge the notion that climate change is absolutely all doom and gloom and horrible and awful and we're all going to perish. But I didn't want to go so far as to make it sound like it's great to have climate change. Hey, let's have more of it. So again, I'm kind of threading this needle and showing you that it's not all bad. There are going to be some bad things, but there are going to be some winners. And I don't know, maybe it's in the way that you frame it. I've just grown tired of this end days scenario that the media and others are churning out. And I also kind of want to challenge this on-off switch associated with climate change, where people think, is it happening? Is it not? That's a 90s question. It is happening. It is absolutely happening, but it is more of something that's going on along a continuum. And do we want, say, 15% of Australia to burn, or do we want 40% of Australia to burn? And more importantly, are there things we can do to dial it back down? So those are kind of the things that I wanted to bring to bear today. And the military term, I think it's making its way into businesses now, BLUF, bottom line up front. There are going to be winners, there are going to be losers, and there are going to be opportunities. So I've color coded these in green being the winners, red being the losers, and with regard to climate change, in yellow being kind of opportunities, and we can make of them what we will. So the winners are these countries here. Let's see this. Yeah. So the winners in the green circles that I drew here include, but are not limited to, places like Russia and Canada and the United States, especially the Northeast, and Canada, especially the maritime provinces. And I'll talk about why throughout the course of today. And then also the European Northwest is going to be an area of winners. And not calling people from these regions losers, but there are places geographically, to sort of give the bottom line up front, where there are going to be losers. And the losers are going to be as a result of things like drought, as a result of natural disasters, meaning more storms, and then also sea level rise. And it's not just what you think when you're hearing about sea level rise, that, oh, the sea level's rising and these houses are going to be submerged. There's a big problem of saltwater intrusion. As sea level rises, salt water will intrude beneath the coastal regions of our countries, of our land masses. And so agriculture could be imperiled and water resources could be imperiled. This is already happening, if you're in the Boston region, places like Hingham. They have deep water wells, they're drawing a lot of water, and they're starting to see small amounts of salinity in their water. So there are going to be winners, there are going to be losers, and we're going to talk about why and how. But really, the low-lying areas such as Bangladesh and Indonesia, also the Atlantic Gulf Coast. The Atlantic Gulf Coast is going to have a lot of problems with sea level rise and with seawater intrusion. Drought, you hear all the time about drought, and then related to drought are things like crop yield reductions and also wildfires come about as a result of drought. So you have all of those things. Crop failures can lead to famine. So the winners in developed countries, we have the countries that are able to mitigate. There are countries that are able to adapt. And so I'll talk about the difference between those two. Mitigation is essentially tackling the causes of the problem. Now, this is a global problem, so it requires a global solution. But when we're looking at climate change, there is the ability to mitigate, to lessen the damage at the root cause. So minimize the root cause. And then we can also talk about adaptation. And in adaptation, instead of minimizing the root cause, tackling the cause and minimizing the impact, we can figure out how to reduce the negative impacts. So if we can reduce the negative impacts, You're not causing anything um, to be lessened, but you are withstanding the damages. And you can see here, this is a seawall. So there have been barriers built in places like Venice, in St. Petersburg, in London. We have barriers along the Atlantic Gulf Coast, and we're expected to have more. So think of all those Atlantic coastal cities. New Orleans, for example, is really a test case for how we will be able to withstand the impacts of climate change. The losers are going to be those countries that are the most vulnerable, such as this country, Bangladesh, that can't afford the cost, to mitigate, can't afford the cost to adapt. And they are the most fragile and vulnerable societies. You have people from Myanmar now kind of going into Bangladesh as already refugees of sorts. So we have developed countries that are going to lose. Either the mitigation or the adaptation is not able to be shouldered economically by these countries. And again, they're often most vulnerable due to their location, and then also their reliance on local agriculture. They don't have the resources with which to buy food from other countries. And the bottom line with this whole thing is that it comes down to money. Maybe you're already starting to see this. And just yesterday, the New York Times, this is an article from the New York Times, Biden yesterday said that there is going to be a lot of money spent by our country to tackle climate change. And furthermore, that doing this will create jobs and it will not kill them. And I really can't emphasize enough, as someone who's been studying this for over 20 years, that this mindset of fixing environmental problems is going to cost businesses, is going to be costly, is going to be ruinous to our economy is just, the precedent is not there. Think about if you can think that far back, think about the 1970s and 60s in California. Because of the geography of Los Angeles, there was a colossal problem with smog. It would be so bad. You could see this orange haze. People described it like a blanket everywhere. And you could smell this chemical smell. People's lungs hurt just from being there. And the government acknowledged it, but essentially said, this is the cost of having industry. This is the cost of our society. We just have to live with this. And under Nixon, Nixon said, no, we are not going to just have this be the cost of our being in society. Nixon signed the Clean Air Act, somewhat begrudgingly the Clean Water Act. And what happened was that was a boon to the economy. People started making programmable thermostats to use less energy and therefore to burn less coal at the time. Better insulation, things like catalytic converters. The cars that were on the road back then, when you had this industrial pollution and smog, emitted 100 times more pollution per car than the cars we have today. So humans can be really ingenious in the way that they tackle problems, and precedent has been set that it's not a partisan issue, and nor is it an issue where if we tackle climate change, we are going to all become bankrupt and broke and it's awful. So let's look a little bit more at some of these winners versus losers. And some of the geographic winners, some of the things that will be winning include agriculture. So they're not all winners, as we'll see, but with regard to agriculture, we have carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. That actually increases productivity. Plants are photosynthetic. And so the plants having this exposure to increased carbon dioxide will grow more rapidly. So you can have an increase in productivity in some cases. You can also shift from in regions, because of this increased productivity, from crops that don't cost as much to more prime yielding crops. For example, places can shift from wheat to growing corn. Grapes, winemaking industries are potentially on the rise because of the increase in productivity of growing the crops, and grapes like it warm. So also tourism increase. Places that maybe were too cold for people to visit in a meaningful way can now go and have tourism. Property values will increase. Also, we'll say, I didn't put this in the slide, but it just came to me now. When talking about mineral resources and also energy resources, for a long time, Antarctica was seen as the holy grail. And there's huge amounts of mineral and energy resources there, but people said we could never get to them. They're buried under miles thick of ice or too far away. Well, now with climate change causing the ice sheets to melt and in places to go away, it makes it economically feasible to mine in places that it didn't used to be. You didn't used to be able to mine. The Navy has opened up new navigable waterways as a result of ice shifting and melting. So not saying it's good, but I'm saying that there are winners based on geography associated with the things that are happening with regard to climate change. But not so fast on the agricultural winners, because you have one piece of this being that there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but as we'll see, there are also water shortages, local water shortages, extreme heat. The number one thing that people are saying is going to happen as a result of climate change is more natural disasters, more storms, more hurricanes, more tornadoes, more violent thunderstorms with hail, and then also you end up with the other extremes too, more droughts, more heat waves. And so those extremes can lead to crop failures. They can also, imagine how many people are flocking to California when the wildfires are at their worst. So you can end up with property values in places that are less desirable because of these changes plummeting. You can end up with crop failures due to this extreme weather. And here's a picture of, an agricultural loser, even though in the previous slide I showed you agricultural winner. So it depends on where you are, and it depends on what goes on in this, in these different regions. So picking up the theme of more storms, that's one of my things I teach in natural disasters class. I've written a number of books and articles on natural disasters. Insurance is going to be more expensive. Why? Well, this is a graph done by the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration on the number of billion-dollar disasters that have, the number of disasters per month. So along the x-axis, you have the month, not a lot of billion-dollar disasters in January, it's too cold. And then on the y-axis, you have the number of billions of dollars. And so what you see is that as we go on through time, 2011 is the light blue, 2018. So those aren't in sequential order. Those are essentially in the order of overall number of deaths and damages due to natural disasters that were $1 billion or over per month. You see 2017, 2020, 2012. Before that, all those gray lines are what happened back through time. So we're having a huge amount of increase in the amount of money spent to recover from natural disasters. In 2020, we spent $95 billion to mitigate the losses from natural disasters. So our insurance is going to rise. The good thing, because again, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool optimist about this, is that when climate change is just sort of a hand-wringing, vague notion of what's going on in the future, people don't really do anything about it, especially since you can't see carbon dioxide. If carbon dioxide were orange, like the nitrogen oxides that we had in the 70s, smog in Los Angeles, then I think people would do a lot more about it, but you can't see it. So kind of out of sight, out of mind. So the good thing, though, is that now we see that climate change is costing us a lot of money. And so when we see this, that's when people act. People are motivated by money, pure and simple. Also, healthcare. There's going to be an increased cost of healthcare. Why? Well, there's going to be these same things that we talked about in the last couple of slides. There's going to be more heat. There's going to be more storms. And so these things like extreme heat, storms, disease coming up, neotropical diseases marching northward, murder hornets and that sort of thing. Lack of water also is going to make people sicker. Right now, about 230 million people globally are at risk of getting malaria, and about 2.2 billion people are at risk of health impacts associated with water shortages. So those are going to be the losers, some of the losers. More people getting sick and more costly healthcare. Some of the winners, trying to balance these things out in the local sense, up here in Boston, as opposed to other regions, lilacs are going to bloom earlier. Isn't that everybody's favorite flower? Oh, and I have a little early, but my favorite white forsythia right behind you on the screen. And so fabulous. Those bloomed earlier this year. Poison ivy, it's a winner, but I don't know who likes poison ivy, certainly not me. Will spread north. The geographic distribution of a lot of species of plants and animals are going to shift. It is estimated, and we'll get into all the studies, but it is estimated that bald eagle hatchlings will survive. So our national bird will grow in numbers. And then some other local things, the construction industry. Usually if you're trying to get someone to work on your house, like I am right now, oh, we have to wait till spring, the ground's frozen or what have you. We have to wait till spring, it's too cold to have liquid water that we need to work with. So as it gets warmer, we'll be able to have construction going on year round. Some of the losers, but again, I like to frame losers as an opportunity, if you will, for many reasons. Dairy cows, because of the heat, et cetera, are going to give less milk, but maybe that's good because that is a self-limiting thing. The meat and dairy industries are responsible for about 15% of the greenhouse gases that are currently going into our atmosphere. And the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization said that to get to this target of well below 2 degrees Celsius increase in climate change, we have to globally, and certainly in this country, shift our diet so that it will be less meat. Doesn't mean everybody's a vegan, but it does mean that there will be less meat that we need to eat. So dairy cows will be giving less milk. Also, I'm going to talk about this in the next couple of slides, talking more specifically about plants and animals. Maple sugaring trees, there will be diseases, they'll be outcompeted by other plants, they're not going to thrive. Apple orchards, apple trees, just like maple trees, are less productive. The skiing industry, not to get personal, but I do use sort of anecdotal things so that just to kind of drive things home. My 2 kids are big snowboarders and they have seasons passes to Butternut in the Berkshires, to Okemo, that's in Vermont, and Sunapee in New Hampshire. And they really didn't get to ski a lot this year. And so you have to drive farther and farther. Maybe that's an adaptation, kid adaptation to climate change, in order to get on slopes that have a reasonable amount of snow and reasonable condition. There will be less corn because the pests are going to go crazy, but corn is one of the most ruinous environmental crops there are. So we're going to tie that into sorghum later. And then also snow removal. The gentleman who does my snow removal in Boston is lamenting because he bought all these new plows, he bought all this new equipment a couple of years ago on credit so that he could get rich by really increasing the amount of snow removal that he does when there are snowstorms. And then we haven't had any snowstorms. So anyone in the snow removal industry, just kind of anecdotally, will perhaps suffer. So more on plants and animals. There are some plants that will win. There are some animals that will win. And so frogs, the American bullfrog is one of the organisms that will be bettered. More algae in ponds, more tadpoles, more frogs. And warmer winters mean that more of these organisms can overwinter and survive. Cockroaches, everybody's friend, the cockroach. So cockroaches have survived every mass extinction that we have had on Earth. And we are in the throes of a mass extinction right now. And cockroaches will survive. I decided to show you a picture of a bullfrog rather than a cockroach, though. And then deer thrive on transitional environments. And as we're in this state of transition and flux, there will be more deer. So I guess you could spin out all of these scenarios and say more deer, more accidents. So that would be negative, automobile accidents, or more hunting so that people can get their own meat. So that might be good. Some of the animal and plant losers in the realm, oh, in the past slide also, I said invasives. In a transitional environment, in an environment that is stressed, it tends to be that the invasives can take over and thrive um, because there's an opportunity created that the plant and animals in an ecosystem are not habituated to this sudden change, and so they can get stressed and can die off, and that leaves opportunities for invasives to thrive. And so the opposite is true. Native plants have habituated, whether you're talking about the pond in my backyard or anywhere, have habituated to a certain temperature, a certain amount of water that's there, and when that changes, they will lose. So there are fragile organisms that will go away. If you're thinking down in Australia, koala bears, panda bears, all of the panda bears that we have on Earth right now, if I remember correctly, are in captivity. So these rare and endangered organisms are losing. These rare and endangered organisms are going away. And I talked about maple. I'll continue to talk about maple trees. The native species in regions, because of the changes, are going to be worse. So let's see, what is this? Oh, sorry. This is kind of a duplicate slide. Oh, your favorite food. Got it. Your favorite food. So maple syrup from the United States, from Vermont. Sorry, that's out of sequence. Vermont maple syrup. Gulf lobsters from the Gulf of Mexico, because it's warmer, they don't thrive in warm water. And Maine lobsters going away. Gulf lobsters, it's sad because they're just going to go away because there's no place for them to go upwards in distribution. Maine lobsters, though, that distribution through time can shift upwards. And so this is an ad from the National Resources Council of Maine, and it's really a public service announcement that is that we should keep Maine lobsters cool. And it's a call to arms to people to try to do things to fight climate change so that lobsters can continue to thrive in the Gulf of Maine, a big part of their economics. Although I recently saw this PSA from a place in Nova Scotia, joking, but it's not a joking matter, because it is the case that Maine lobsters will go away, but the lobsters from Canada are going to suddenly, they'll experience a boon. Those fisher people can go and can catch lobsters in a way that they didn't before. Maple syrup will go away from Vermont, known for maple syrup, but it will start to thrive in Canada, the shifting distribution northward. This is an article from a magazine called Science News. Get ready to eat differently in a warmer world. And I can talk about this all day, but other things to talk about. Sorghum is a grain that we don't usually think about in this country, but it's something that, because of the warmer world, we may be looking at as our staple for our grains. And this begs the question, to what extent are we going to genetically modify food so that we can produce more food on less land, or that we can produce drought resistant, which there's a lot of stuff that's going on right now with that. Bill Gates undertook an initiative to make drought resistant rice. Rice grows in flooded areas, but there are places that are no longer as wet as they used to be. So if you have drought resistant rice, you can keep the crops up. I also heard a talk maybe 2 years ago. This woman from Vietnam was talking about how when she went home, she was disconcerted to find that the farmers were elated because the rice growers in Vietnam, sea level, Vietnam is often thought of ground zero for climate change, is rising. And so the water's getting deeper and saltier. So the farmers that were able to grow rice are now able to farm shrimp. And they're so excited because this is a much more economically valuable crop or organism to sell. So they're really happy. But if that keeps on going, there won't be shrimp or rice there. So these changing distributions is going to make for all sorts of winners and losers. In the case of Vietnam, yeah, rice loses, shrimp wins. for right now over the short term. Some other things that are winners: potatoes, especially if we have a variety of different potatoes. Hemp, one of my favorite crops because it's a weed. It grows like a weed. It regenerates soil. It is the only that I know of plant that has the complete set of amino acids, has omega-3 fatty acids. It is a wonder food, and it is thriving in this new climate. So that was from, oh, sorry, this picture is from, yeah, Science News. So if you will permit me, I want to talk very briefly about some opportunities. And in this case, I'm talking about opportunities for lots of working professionals, myself included. Look at me, I have a job talking about this. I'm paid to talk about this. So there are opportunities that exist for engineers, for scientists, for geologists like myself, for academics, and for students. And this is a picture of a wetland in the Gulf Coast and outside of, and so yeah, this is just a large picture of a Gulf Coast wetland. Wetlands are unbelievable places. They're nurseries for larval fish. They buffer storm erosion. Wow, it just started snowing and it's April. See that? Buffering storm erosion. They are biological supermarkets. They have all sorts of fantastic capabilities to help humans with tangible benefits. And I have a student who I'm working with on creating a land buffering solution for converting a developed area, and I'll show you some pictures of this, into a constructed wetland. So this is an opportunity for scientists. And in this case, this is an article that I published with my graduate student that says that essentially, if you distill it down, people are mining crude oil, fossil fuels in the Gulf, which is getting burned and causing climate change, which is causing storms, which is coming back and harming the people and the process plants, the petroleum refining and mining industries. So it's this cycle. And so if we can break this cycle and cause the climate change aspect of this to be mitigated, then we can continue to drill for oil. So in terms of opportunity, again, I was so excited by this paper, and we had Drew and I have this forward momentum that I sit on the Geological Society of America, the Council for Science and Public Policy, where we inform Congress and others on matters of sort of public policy interest. And I said to them, to GSA, oh, you should do a session that is on economics and on engineering. They said, okay, you preside. So there I am presiding. And this is the talk I gave that was really kind of furthering the natural disasters that are happening as a result of climate change. And this is a picture of the refinery complex. It's right outside of Port Arthur, Texas. Scroll through these a little bit fast. So there's the refinery complex. You have Sabine Lake right here. And what's happening here is that there's the refinery. And look at this, Port Arthur, Texas, a residential development right immediately adjacent to the process plant that is causing climate change, 3/4 of climate change from fossil fuels. And then this is the development to the west and northwest. And here's an overlay, a GIS overlay of wetlands. It's ringed by wetlands. So Drew and I are issuing really kind of a call to arms and a plea to the MOTIVA plant and to government to purchase this and to turn it into a wetland. Why? Well, because where you have petrochemical process plants, you have cancer. This is America's petrochemical cancer alley, and this is the Gulf of Mexico right here. And what you can see is that these places have disproportionate amount of cancer. The darker the color, essentially, the higher the risk of cancer. And this is the Beaumont Charles Alley area here. And this is, again, looking at the concentration in the air of pollution. So you have air pollution, you have cancer, and this is the map in sort of a close-up area, the cancer risk, your risk of getting cancer, and it is 4 times higher when you're living in Port Arthur than it would be if you lived 100 miles away. So Port Arthur is thought of, and this whole area is thought of as the cancer belt of the United States and of Texas. It is among the worst in the nation for air and water-based toxic emissions from when disasters hit the plant, etc. And it is a social justice issue because the Black population, it's about a third Black, a third Hispanic Latino, and a third white. And the Black population is disproportionately affected. They have a 4 times higher rate than whites for lung and heart problems associated with this problem. And you have 4 times the respiratory problems when you're in this region. So the opportunity here for my student, for myself, for the Port Arthur area is Drew and I talking about how to conduct a parcel by parcel analysis, figure out where's the risk greatest, try to find a way to buy those parcels, relocate people to a more desirable area. I don't mean displace them, but relocate them to a more desirable area, and then buy that land, and with that land, turn it into a constructed wetland. Wetlands are really good at soaking up any sort of spills of petrochemicals, and so that people will be better located farther away from the cancer alley, and the wetlands can do their job to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and many other things. So I don't know about you, but all I see here are jobs for the trades. You have to move buildings if you have historic buildings, or if they're not historic, then you could destroy them, but that means you need to make someone a new building. So you have plumbers, you have electricians, you have engineers, you have architects, you have people that make roads, you have all sorts of jobs and money being spent associated with the fact that you're moving people. So there is a picture here of one of my favorite singers, Janis Joplin. When Drew came to me, he lives in the Port Arthur area, not in Port Arthur, but in that area. He said, and I'm teaching at Harvard, I'm his research advisor at Harvard. We started working on this. So the first thing I knew about Port Arthur, oh, that's Janis Joplin's hometown. And so ironically, this is a picture of her last concert, which took place at Harvard Stadium. Was the last concert. So we have this connection, he and I, between Port Arthur and Harvard through Janis Joplin. So other opportunities for spending and for technological innovation. There's a lot of exciting development in the way of technological innovations to figure out how to adapt and how to mitigate. And this is a this is from Cosmos. I think I have some yeah. Cosmos magazine, and there is a biodegradable sticky gel that can be sprayed on forests. It is inert, and it is able to cut wildfires by 70%. So it is thought by various studies that developed countries, 90% of the things that happen can be mitigated, and about 50% of the things that happen can be mitigated in industrializing countries. So we can do this. Another innovation, there are global water shortages, and that's bad news. And it's bad news, especially for those who are not wealthy. Looking at my sources, innovative water solutions. I just found this online in Texas. People are facing water shortages. It is estimated that with a 1 degree Celsius rise, 2 billion people on Earth will potentially face water shortages. And with a 2 degree Celsius rise in temperature, there will be 3 billion people that will face water shortages. So you can think of this as a doom and gloom doomsday thing. Okay. You can also think of it as an opportunity for those working in water to come up with innovative solutions. We have 1.36 billion cubic kilometers of water on the surface of Earth, cycling around and around. It's not going anywhere. It's not like oil that we're using up and burning. It's here. It's a question of distributing it, and it's a question of it being in sufficient good quality so that it doesn't harm people or make people sick. But again, all I see here are jobs. There will be some losers as we shift away from fossil fuels. And as we start to retool our transportation system, again, President Biden talked about redoing infrastructure, spending a huge amount of money on infrastructure. associated with addressing climate change, associated with getting through the pandemic. And so there we have, new jobs, source of electricity generation, coal-based and increasingly crude oil-based going away. As you can see here, between 80 to 95, 9,000 jobs a year were lost in the coal industry. This is something that we can't leave people behind. And that was one of Hillary Clinton's downfalls, that she just sort of passed over certain populations in our society and didn't say, you matter and you need to be brought forward. So, when you start talking about this level of job loss, it is a problem, and not my job because I am a scientist, but we've got to do things to fix it. So just a couple of last points. This is sort of what can you do? And there are three areas. Shame on me, I should have put four. Number one is with transportation. Can you take the public transport? Can you walk? Can you get an electric car? Can you get a hybrid car? There are opportunities for you to do your part to help climate change to be kind of dialed back a little bit. With regard to electrical energy, can you turn off lights? Can you switch to LEDs? So much energy was saved as we shifted from incandescent light bulbs. My engineering friends always call those, which I laugh, 95% efficient heater, which means it's only 5% efficient as a light source. So going to LEDs has saved a huge amount of electricity. Can you choose alternative energy on your electric bill? And then also what I didn't put in here that I should, which is powerful, is to eat less meat. And I tell my undergrads that when you are talking about eating less meat, it tends to get politicized. It tends to get, really emotional. People's cultures around eating and meat. It doesn't mean that you have to be a complete vegan. That is more, I think, a personal identity than a life choice. But you can dial back the meat consumption, and shifting the subsidies away from the dairy and meat industries would go a long way for that. And then also you can plant trees, give trees to people and plants to people as gifts. And you can do things to combat deforestation. I put this picture here because of teaching at an art school, little birdies that are paper mache. They're made out of recycled paper. So you can recycle paper every chance you get, because there's energy, et cetera, that goes into that. And you can also, you have to, when you have the supply side and demand side meeting up, that's good. You also should be buying recycled paper. Things like recycling aluminum, cannot state strongly enough how important that is. It's so important that a lot of people that are in the environmental field feel we shouldn't be using aluminum in a consumptive sense for things like cans for soda or food. And if you recycle aluminum cans, then you are causing 95% less energy, fossil fuel energy, to be used. So something that maybe doesn't seem connected is very connected. The more aluminum you recycle, the less climate change, a huge amount of reduction. And it really just kind of bottom line, after working in the environmental field for over 20 years and having my own personal kind of shift in the way that I present this to people, from look how horrible this is, look how awful this is, it just gets people to shut down. We can't feel overwhelmed by this. But there are, while acknowledging the very real risks of climate change, there are opportunities across the board to address this, to make new connections, to innovate, and to do really good things, to bond together as a globe, as a community, as anything, to fight this. Precedent has been set in fighting this, and it both, in terms of ozone thinning in the past, and then also the mentioning I did of Los Angeles and smog, acid rain. We solved that using cap and trade, and cap and trade has been discussed with climate change. There are ways to take this and bond together and make winners of us all. Why do I end with this picture? Well, this is completely corny, but it is it is how I am able to stay mentally sane in a field, the environmental field, that oftentimes is fraught with such problems and doom and gloom forecasts. And I don't know if you know the starfish story. I also use it in dog rescue, but there was a little boy and he was walking along the beach, not quite this picture, but similar. And there were all these starfish baking out in the sun and dying. And he was taking a starfish and throwing it into the water. And then take another starfish and throw it into the water. And an older man walked by and said, "What are you doing? There's millions of starfish out here. You can't possibly think you're making a difference." And he picked up another starfish and threw it into the ocean and said, "I made a difference to that one." So know that next time you put a can into the recycle bin, you are fighting climate change. Stop recording.